Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. So let's talk about Math and Ronin Warriors, aka Samurai Troopers, aka Legendary Samurai Troopers, aka Samurai Warriors. It was known as several things in different regions, but originally known as Legendary Samurai Troopers. In any case, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how math is involved, both in universe and in the meta sense, as well as my feelings towards Ronin Warriors. It is something that's been in my life for a weirdly long amount of time. Like I grew up on that show, and it's like it's interesting, and not that it's like the most important thing in the world, but it's one of the animes that started as an anime first and then became a manga, and I don't feel like you see that like in a super common way. You know what I mean? But anyway, assume that there are spoilers. Assume all the spoilers for the entire series. Um, and yeah, that would be fair. And if you want to stick around, great. If you don't, I get it. So spoilers ahead. Let's get into it. Let's go. So with Ronin Warriors, it's almost as old as I am. Uh, it came out in 1988, and the initial series ran into like 1989 as well. And there were later some OVAs that were attached with it. One was a side story, and the other two were part of the main canon. And so with Ronin Warriors, it's 39 episodes for the series, but with the OVAs being split up as they were, um, with the first one being like 2 episodes pretty much, and then 4 for the second and 5 for the third, we end up with pretty much 11 more episodes. So with all of Ronin Warriors, including the OVAs, we're looking at like 50 episodes worth of material. All like telling the story of the Ronin Warriors and their stuff, with 2 of those episodes being side stories. And you feel about those how you feel, right? For me, I didn't get a chance to see those, unfortunately, because they were not included in the box set that I had that I got from college, which is crazy because it's like almost 20 years ago. But I digress. Um, so with Ronin Warriors, like I was saying a little earlier, it was an anime first and was later adapted into a manga. And I'll be focusing on the anime for most of it, but then things around it too will pop up. So with it, you might know the basics, you might not, but the idea is for our main characters, we have like the 5 Ronin Warriors, the Ancient One, and 2 side characters that are reoccurring, and then several other characters will pop up. Like you have the 4 Dark Warlords, you have Tulpa, and you have his minions and all that stuff. But anyway, so let's start by talking about like the 5 armors. So the idea is like you have these 5 armors, and they're supposed to work really well together, and they're stronger when they're together. And as these armors fight, they get stronger. So it's like they're like Saiyans. But also it's kind of like you can think of it like it works in an RPG, if that helps you kind of visualize that. And we see different things in the series that help us visualize things. But the idea is like in a video game, like noticeably with an RPG, you're going to have your characters and they start off with a certain level and they have certain stats and you gain experience, usually through battle and sometimes through items. But either way, you're powering up, you're getting these stat boosts, you're getting more powerful. So it's pretty much like that without seeing it as visually and directly, but still seeing it visually, right? Like, but so not only is there math and the idea that you have a certain amount of armors that are supposed to be, more powerful together. You have villains taking advantage of that fact and trying to divide our heroes. You also have power ups along the way. The action actually holds up a pretty decent amount, like surprisingly. Um, and it kind of reminds me of Dragon Ball in some sense, because there was like some of the fighting is more fast paced at certain parts, and there was definitely like some parts in the later episodes where it's like, okay, yeah, that's like a Dragon Ball Z fight. um, so yeah, it's like it's pretty cool stuff though. But so not only is there math in the armors and how strong they are when they're together, but it's like these armors have different elements associated with them. And going back to like the RPG idea, it's like, hey, these elements will have certain strengths. against certain other elements and certain weaknesses against other. And in this case, when they're also in their environment, they get a type advantage. So it's kind of like how with Pokemon, certain characters might be like boosted by the weather. Like if it's sunny, you might have fire types. Get boosted. And I mention that because there's like points early on when the characters get booted to their environments, and they get stronger. Like Rio gets trapped in a volcano, but gets more powerful because he's like got the wildfire armor. But my whole point is like it's just it reminds me so much of a video game and also Dragon Ball. Like when I look back, but so not only is there math in the power of the armors and what they're strong against, what they're weak against, and what boosts them. There's also math in the animation, right? There's math in that meta sense of the animation, like being able to make everything function and flow, and as well as the time that's going into it. But also math in the actual animations, right? Like because they're doing these things where these characters they're moving really quickly, right, in some cases, and so they want to convey speed, and there's so many different ways you can convey that speed. And for the record, speed is something that's inherently mathematical itself. But going back to how you convey it though, it's like, well, maybe a character is barely moving and some characters going around them and they're like dodging effortlessly, right? That's one way. But also like a flurry of punches could be another. Or maybe characters are barely moving but some character that's really fast is moving, and it's just like it's always this good way to like so, oh well, this character is now fast or faster, and it changes with the characters, it changes with how powerful they come. But the ideas get used the same, if that makes sense. And so the characters were faster than I remember, and then like the scale and scope of some of the battles is like a lot of the parts of the earlier season. They're going through cities and there's a lot of property damage, and you get a sense of how strong these characters are, and showing that visually is something that is interesting as well as mathematical. It's very deliberate, very calculated, and so you also get an idea by like you might have characters they break through a building or something, or they'll leave this like giant impact, like a crater, if they get knocked into something, or you'll see like different attacks being used to convey strength, and you also there's a lot of focus on position and speed, and in general, and that these are mathematical concepts, and I think that's cool. And so I feel like there was a surprising amount done to convey that characters are strong or fast or stronger than this character, faster than that character, and I think that was interesting. And as we progress through the series, I think what gets fascinating to me is like if you look at the original series, just the first 39 episodes, you can kind of break it down into thirds. Like the first third, you have kind of a traditional like tale of these like friends getting together to fight evil, and their struggles with that and getting stronger along the way and defeating the big bad. And what's interesting about that, before going into the other thirds, you have these five armors and you knew they were stronger together, but then you see this in a more direct way with the infernal armor, where the power of the armor is literally coming together in one armor. So, and that armor is stupidly broken. It only gets more broken as the time goes on. um but anyway, so like that's in the first half, oh sorry, first third. You have that, and then like the second third is kind of strange in that like there's a journey to build up more lore, there's journey to get new swords for the infernal armor, but it has like kind of a monster slash demon of the week kind of feel, where it's like characters where you don't really ever see them again, or you see them for a few episodes but then not again after that. And then you have the third, where it's like, hey, we're kind of doing what we did in the first part, but in the Never world, and two characters are not going to be. Sorry, most of the characters are going to be taken out of commission, with two leading the charge. Um, and so it gets interesting. But my whole thing is like, in addition to the stuff that I said, right, like in a meta sense, so you had these 39 episodes, and you divide out what's going to happen in each part, right? Like you have an idea of how many episodes you're going to do, right? It's like, well, hey, we're going to do 39 episodes. And it's like, well, the episodes, how long are they going to be? In this case, like around 20, 22 minutes, somewhere in there, right? And so it's like, okay, so we're going to do that. And like, how are we going to divide things, right? Um, and there's math in that, like how you divide out a story, what you want to get across. And also, leaving space for commercials and stuff like that. And having an opening and an ending. And what's interesting about that to me is like it is iconic to have openings and endings, like especially with anime, right? Um, and not only is it iconic and it serves of like, hey, tying this song to this franchise, but it also saves time, right? It saves animation. Um, and there's a lot of deliberate things that are done to make an opening or to make a close and to decide how long it's going to be and what images are you going to get across. And then while we're talking about opens and endings, let's talk about music. Like music is something that is inherently mathematical. It's really like all like math. So you have like these songs or these musical beats or motifs, and it's like each note is mathematical in nature. You're playing this note, you're playing that note, you're deciding how long this note is going to be played. You're gonna decide how many beats you're gonna have in between notes. You're dealing with time signatures, you're dealing with tempos. You're deciding how loud this has to be or that has to be. You're trying to get that music to convey certain emotions. And you're deciding how things are being used. And like to me, Ronin Warriors has some decent music, and it's very intentional and very mathematical, and how it's used as well. And speaking of the opening and ending saving time and animation, so do transformation sequences as well as recycled animation. I want to talk about recycled animation first, and then like go into transformation sequences. Also, there was some sort of car in the background, but I was trying to power through, but I heard it. Um, so with recycled animation, it's not uncommon to see that in different shows, and it's definitely not uncommon to like see that in anime, especially for a certain period of time. um, God, Dragon Ball is really guilty of that, but so is Road Warriors. And but here's the thing: recycled animation doesn't have to be inherently bad, but it should be used constructively. So here's the thing with that, right? Like with recycled animation, you save time, you save money, and you don't have to animate as much, right? But you have to be careful because you don't want it to feel too stale. You don't want to use it too often. You don't want to like not touch it up because then that can be distracting, right? So you have to choose with that recycled animation what you want to do. You have to have the right motion, the right position, the right speed, and then be able to adjust that with a scene, right? And try to make it feel familiar but not stale. And it's all very deliberate. And I think like one of the best examples or the attacks for the animation in Ronin Warriors, and back to Dragon Ball, that too. But that's a whole other thing for a whole other video. But with Ronin Warriors, like take their Under Armor forms at first, like before they armor up all the way. They're just fighting like the enemies, like sometimes smaller ones, sometimes the big ones, but they'll do like a single attack. Like I think like one of the ones that stood out to me is like Rowan, because he'll do like this crazy flip in the air, like a flip kick, and they used it a couple times. And what I found interesting about that is like the way they color things in the background, so they can pretty much like kind of sub that in when he's about to do it, and it doesn't get too distracting. But you can notice it if you're looking for that sort of thing or just happening upon it without it breaking things up. So it's like they chose this attack. So it's like, well, let's get this character in this position with this move, and let's have it be this long and this many frames and this color, and then stick it here, stick it there, and it's all math. And another thing with recycled animation is when someone's using like one of their signature attacks, whether it be hero or villain. Like, and I think it's very fascinating to me because it's like you have this animation that you're using several times, but it also serves a purpose outside of saving time and money. Because not only does it save time, not only does it save money, not only is it less things to animate, but it's something that is iconic and tied to a character. and that repetition builds up that connection with people a bit more, and they can associate that with the character, and I think that's fascinating to me. So it's pulling a lot of duties. So like recycled animation isn't necessarily bad, but don't get me wrong, some people can use it horribly. But with that idea of recycled animation, let's use that to talk about transformation sequence, because this is a specific type um, of recycled animation that isn't like attack, right? Because most of the ones that I've seen are like attacks or things of that nature, and that could also be the kind of anime that I usually watch, right? But with transformation sequences, in this case, is very iconic because like you'll have a character, they each will have like positions that they use to kind of get to the same part. Um, and then they call up their armors, and they all have their different sequences where for the regular armor, it's got like kind of like a floral pattern and music associated with it, and it kind of wraps them up, and then boom, they get their armor. And you see this throughout the series. So it's like it had to be something that was designed to be very specific. It's like, okay, so we're gonna have this person, that person start the sequence. We're gonna have this thing, that thing happen within the sequence, and this will lead to the transformation. And then you kind of go from there, and then they'll use their signature techniques and stuff like that. So it's just like with transformation sequences, they're interesting because they're not just recycled animation with the idea being just to like cut down costs. It's like it's also to be like iconic connections with characters, and so it's like choosing the right position, the right musical cue, the right design, and having it come together and be something that you use repeatedly while not necessarily feeling boring. So, not having it too drawn out, but the timing is tricky, right? Because it's like, well, not everyone's going to enjoy that, but you kind of get used to it. You kind of expect it, and to be honest, like sometimes you kind of want to see it. And then what I find interesting is like with the Infernal Armor, it's a different kind of transformation, and not only do you have the traditional transformation sequence and what it was doing, like based on what I just said. Here, it also plays a role in the story in an interesting way. You can argue that, yeah, that kind of happens in general, but like here is something specific that I wanted to note. So with Infernal Armor, one, that transformation sequence is dope. You should check it out if you haven't seen it. But it's fascinating because like whenever Rio um, gets it right, it's typically a reluctant thing, right? Like other people want him to put on the armor, but he tends to not want it, or he's doing it reluctantly. But the transformation sequence, it plays out differently. He looks shocked. He looks horrified. The armor's coming onto him. His Under Armor changes, then the armor starts coming onto him, and he's just like, "Oh no!" And it's fascinating to me because like that transformation sequence kind of reflects how he feels, and that's deliberate. So in any case, so you have recycled animation, you have transformation sequence, you have openings, you have endings, and all these things end up making something in part iconic while also saving money, saving time, and saving things to animate. And if used right, like I said, it creates something iconic, something recognizable. That repetition, which is also something that's inherently mathematical, matters as well as the timing and the length. And again, if used effectively, it could actually be a good thing, especially if you're going on the animator's perspective or like some this company or that company, right? Um, and then like within a universe, they use math like how we use it, right? Like they use it to talk about positions, right? Or use it to figure out like, well, how long do they have to do this thing or that thing, or try to measure how powerful someone is, even if they don't like label explicit numbers. They're power scaling. And what's interesting too is like back to the armors. It's like they're aware of the math with that. These armors are more powerful when they're together, which is something that the villains don't want, at least not in the way you think. Also, we find out later that the five armors are actually part of a set of nine armors, which came from one armor, which was Talpa. Um, he's a fascinating villain because like he's the big bad. He deeply annoys me, but he's iconic. Um, In any case, so you have the 39 episodes, and then you have like the 11 episodes that compose the three OVAs, with one of them being a side story. So you have like this like 50 episodes worth of material, and deciding how that goes. And I want to bring up the recycled animation just because, like I said, it can be used in a good way, but not always, because they use a lot of recycled animation and to make flashbacks for the third OVA, and I didn't think it was all that. I didn't think it was great, great use of that. But anyway, so yeah, um, there's so much more I could talk about, but I want to wrap this up in a bit, and feel free to discuss in the comments. So I want to talk about how I felt about it all overall. So like I rewatched Ronin Warriors several times in my life. When I was a kid, um, it was interesting because like it came out in 1995, and it came out like during the summer of 95, and they were showing it like 5 days a week. So it was interesting to go through that and see it. And I remember like watching some episodes in like an art like program that I was in, where we like, there's parts where we would like make art, but then parts where we would like watch it and stuff like that. And so they were taking chances, and we ended up watching Ronin Warriors in there too, so that was pretty cool. And then like with Toonami, they would go on to run Ronin Warriors as well. And then when I was in college, I got like a box set. The box set did include the side story OVA, which was like 2 episodes worth of material, and I haven't really tracked it down. But it came with everything else, and like it came with the English version and the original Japanese version for everything. Um, and I feel like I got some decent bang for my buck. Um, and I watched it, like I think like a few more times over the years, but it's been a while since the last time. And so rewatching it lately has been interesting, especially given what I do here on the channel, because like I'm more sensitive to different things that pop up and like behind the scenes stuff. Like that's always been there, but that's increased. And I appreciate the editing, I appreciate the transitions and like the mechanics of it all. But so if I'm being honest about the series, it's like I have mixed feelings about it. I think overall, I was surprised by how well the action held up. Like it was still pretty good. And I would say that while the whole series is decent and holds up a lot, like better than one would expect, um, the first third is absolutely the strongest part. It's like if you watch that first third of episodes, it's a complete arc, start to finish. It's good, it ends well. That second third of the series is like meh. It's like it fills out the lore, which is great, but the monster of the week stuff doesn't work out so well. It doesn't make you care about anything that's going on. That third is interesting. I feel like they did rehash some things, so that's less than ideal. But they had some really cool battles and epic scenes, and you're introduced to Lady Kiora, and that's a fun character with some tragedy thrown in there. But you see a lot of cool things, a lot of cool effects and animation, and I mean, there's a lot of bright colors. I think it was like very lively, and that's a good thing. Um, and then, so yeah, overall it's kind of a mixed bag for the series, but like I think overall it's good, but the first third is the strongest. The Legend of the Inferno Armor is one of the OVOs that came with the box set, and the action still holds up, but the story is rather flimsy. That doesn't hold up. But more importantly than that, um, the depictions of Africans in the movie, it's like it's confusing because you see that they can draw like African people, right? They can draw black people, and it's like, and because you see that like in a village, and you see that with a black guy who's one of the airports, so they could draw black people without getting super stereotypical, right? But most of the people you see in the video is like what people think of as stereotypical Africans, and it's like no, it's not great. And to try to play it off by saying like, it's an older tribe, but it's just like I didn't care for the racial representation, and also it gets kind of weird with Mukala and his fiance. in that movie because like they pretty much look like all the other characters. They don't really have any like black features, you know. They got like I don't know. They have darker skin, but it's that's about it. And it's weird and awkward because you know they could have drawn them differently. But yeah, so that's my thing. It's like the action for that is okay, in the sense that it still holds up. That's pretty good, but horrible racial representation in a story that's like eh. And then the last one, message that OVO, it was a bit too long. They have a character that is really hard to sympathize as the big bad, and it's super depressing and it overuses animations. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's not the best either. I think it's kind of a sad way to end the series. Like I mean, like literally sad. Um, and it's like there were some interesting ideas though. So when I look back, I gotta say like the OVOs, sorry, OVAs seem excessive, and I don't think they add as much to the series. And just watching the 39 episodes would probably be enough. But if you're curious, watching the OVAs is not a waste of time, but it's just going knowing that one, it does not have the best racial depictions, and the second one is a stone cold bummer, or the two that came with the box sets that I had, and I don't know about the Gaiden one. But I wanted to close it out though to say that like overall, I did enjoy my rewatch of Ronin Warriors. It's just like it's not without flaws, it's not without problems, to say the least. But I do think like at least for the action alone, it holds up way better than one would think. And there's still a lot of good parts of that. And what's fascinating about the OVAs is there were some corrections from the earlier dubs that they made. And it's like fair enough. Um, so it's one of those things where I would recommend the main series, but I would have more problems recommending the OVAs. Um, but Ronin Warriors, either way, is a big part of my history. It's one of my first animes, and it was like one of those things where back then they were trying to almost hide the fact that these anime were Japanese, and it's like a crazy thing, right? And with Ronin Warriors, you couldn't really hide that like at all. You couldn't, and they didn't try. And I think that's good because you were exposed to a different culture, and like I think for a lot of kids, they're okay with that. It's like adults that have the problem. At least that's my experience. So yeah, overall, I like Ronin Warriors. It's just like there are definitely some problems, and the OVAs are not the best to me. But yeah, so that's about it. I'll see you in the next one.